Good afternoon, everybody. I know we've got some remote viewers who I probably haven't met before. My name's Steve Kehoe. I'm a co-founder of BitTiger. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the first 100 days in a startup. So part of this will be the story of BitTiger in the last 3 months and starting our education platform. And in the second half, I'm going to lay out some tips on how to set up a company if you're like a foreign student working in the US, how you would transfer your H-1B visa into a startup, and then also some of the very basic building blocks of how you would go about raising money from investors for your seed round for your company. So it all starts with having a great idea. Maybe you were doing the hackathon today with the Agora SDK and you think your idea might go beyond today's prize money. But whether you're trying to change the world or you're just trying to make a ton of money at your startup, doesn't really matter. You've still got this challenge. Engineers are very good at coming up with ideas and building solutions, but it often seems like going to company is like going across this narrow bridge I have pictured here over this big, canyon. It's like, what do I do? Because all sorts of other things come into play. How do you lead a team? How do you motivate people? You could start with the traditional Silicon Valley checklist, which is, a fridge full of beer, a cool hoodie, and maybe an endless supply of Subway sandwiches because you're not going to be able to afford anything else in the beginning while you quit your day job and you're working at a startup. But contrary to the popular culture image of what it means to run a startup, the number one thing is to have a clear vision. So you've probably heard this quote before. It's a very famous one from Jeff Bezos, who's kind of like the American Jack Ma. He says, we're stubborn on vision, but we're flexible on the details. So, in the 21st century, you have to have more than just an idea on its own. You have to have a clear vision of what you want to do. And, clearly for Amazon, this was the customer shopping experience before these online retailers was terrible. You had to have all these different catalogs. It took weeks for stuff to arrive. If you had to deal with customer service ever, I don't know about you guys, but in my 5 years of using Amazon now, I've never actually had to talk to anybody from the company, which is kind of amazing considering how much stuff I've ordered from them. So for BitTiger, our vision is really that we want to provide students and professionals with a space for hands-on, efficient, on-demand learning. And what I mean by hands-on is that if anybody who was here in the beginning, I talked about it a little bit, but that most of us learn faster and more effortlessly and much more deeply when we're actually mixing what we hear in lectures with actually doing practical projects. So we try to integrate that into everything we do, and even more than we do now going forward. We want learning to be efficient. This is why we're experimenting now with shorter video formats and not doing super long lectures. If we do something longer, it's more informal, like a talk show. But when we get down to the actual coursework, we want shorter videos on demand so you can learn exactly what you need to know when you need to learn it. And then in the on-demand part is also kind of what I'll go over a lot, which is that I don't think learning only happens the 4 years that you're in college. I think most people I've talked to, when they get to their first job, a lot of learning happens there with project-based stuff. The problem is once you start working, let's say you're a front-end engineer at Facebook, you're going to just be working on the front-end stuff. What if your real interest starts to become augmented reality and data science? How do I not only take a course but get some experience doing that if I want to make the transition? Or maybe I just want to go from junior engineer to senior engineer to architect, and I need to have a better perspective of how the different aspects of the system are fitting together. So anyways, the point is you want to do that on demand. You want the information when you need it, not years earlier. All right, so I don't know if any of you have watched this show Silicon Valley in the US. It's really funny kind of caricature, but the reason I put the picture up there is after vision, sometimes the team, I actually say if you had to choose between what came first, the team or the vision, the team's more important. Even our vision was still in flux when we started the company, but when you find a team where you really feel like you could be great friends with the other people, because as a startup, you're going to spend a lot of time together, and particularly a lot of tough times trying to figure out what you're going to do. So, your startup founding team, it's kind of like a relationship, at least like a best friend kind of relationship. And even though everybody will have a unique set of skills that they're going to bring to the company, it's important that at some deep level you have a shared set of core values. So I wanted to talk about what core values are, because a lot of times you see companies putting these up and they're always a little bit cheesy, but it's not about what you like, what you don't like, agreeing with each other all the time. And it's not even, you will have a shared mission and a vision, but it's even deeper than that. It's more fundamental. It's really, your founders have to be aligned at some base level, like philosophical level almost, of core beliefs, right? So that you can operate together in a synchronized way. And that these values should actually transcend opinions about what's going to make the business succeed. I mean, that's also, all that stuff's important, but this is even deeper than that. So for BitTiger, let's quickly go over our 5 core values. So the first one, we use this all the time, is openness, right? Which is not to get so fixated on one particular idea or approach. Be open to the uncertainty that's going to be facing you in a startup, and be open to feedback from the outside world. So without being open to the feedback we were getting from our clients and our early students, we'd probably still be a consulting company and still going headstrong on that instead of really taking feedback from people. Next one is honesty, and what I really mean by that is focusing on plain truths over elaborate fabrications. Like, I'm up here talking about the 100 days in a startup because I'm now over the 100 days in a startup. I have direct experience of it. Nothing bothers me more than listening to people that just get up here and rattle off buzzwords and, they don't really know what they're talking about. So we try to approach that in our classes too. Instead of just us trying to teach every class, we would rather go get experts in, even if you're only an expert in one small library or one small piece of technology, you could be qualified to teach that. Whereas in the university system, we put so much weight on these teachers. Like, you have to be an expert in all of physics, and then maybe they're more of a chemist or something, but they're trying to teach physics classes. So, anyways, that's one of our core values. Focus is a really important one, because if you lean too much on the openness, you could always be taking feedback. You still do have to focus on whatever your core vision is, and execute on that. Fun is, it's actually more important than being the 4th one down, but that's where it landed on the list. And this is kind of just when you're doing what you love, work becomes more fun, more effortless. I've spent days where I really didn't want to be working on a project, like with prior companies, and you could spend days just staring at the screen and getting no progress done, right? But if you're really into it and you're building some app that you're really thrilled about, in several hours you can construct, a whole basic app. So it's really amazing how the mind can work when it's having fun. And then the last one we call Jedi, like, from Star Wars, just do it. And a lot of times I see, programmers will spend months and months and months planning. And for certain types of work, that might make sense. But particularly in a startup, it's better to try things quickly. And every week, reflect, is this still working towards our vision, or is it time to try a slightly different approach? And we have some examples of that coming up in a little bit. So, this is where's Ming Chia? He's not here. Okay, well, an early test on our core values was, originally it was Chi Yuan and I, and we knew we needed a 3rd co-founder, right? Both of us were highly technical. We needed somebody that was better with people, right? And we searched for a while. It came down to 2 people. One guy was a trained businessman, MBA type guy. He could say all the right things. He made grandiose promises. We're going to get you into Harvard. We're going to, you're going to be in the newspaper, right? But anytime we pressed him on his claims to actually do something, it was, oh, well, what's in it for me? What percentage am I getting? It was all about him, basically. The other guy, more laid back, had a friendly approach, didn't make a lot of demands, just started working on the business goals rather than just talking about it. And now, in hindsight, I could safely say if we had gone the other direction, we wouldn't be where we are today, because that guy was Ming Chia, and he's probably the guy that brought most of you here, because he seems to know everybody in Silicon Valley and has a really friendly personality. So that was one of our first tests where we really had to fall back on our core values. But just having core values isn't going to be enough. In the beginning, building momentum is really going to be the number one goal. I have a short quote here from Jim Collins, who's one of these business gurus that wrote a book that's older now, and it's more about bigger companies, called Good to Great. And this quote is about building momentum, which he compares to a flywheel. If you've seen these before, they're really heavy, right? And I'll just read the quote. More than anything else, real people and real companies want to be part of a winning team. They want to contribute to producing real results. They want to feel the excitement and the satisfaction of being part of something that just flat out works. When people begin to feel the magic of momentum, when they begin to see tangible results and can feel the flywheel starting to build speed, that's when they line up and throw their shoulders to the wheel and really start pushing. Right? And so the lesson from this is basically, instead of setting these huge, unachievable goals as a small startup, it's much better to set short-term goals that are achievable, iterate quickly over them, and then stay disciplined in actually analyzing, okay, so, we have our core vision, right? We want to bring this new way of learning, this new wind to learning to people, right? Are the things we're doing getting us there? And as you take those smaller steps in the right direction, your team gets more confidence and they put more effort into it. So a couple of our early goals, we focused on WeChat as one of our main channels, and that got us a lot of initial viewers, right? And so it was working week to week, and we started re-examining it, and we found, oh wow, we're getting thousands and thousands more people to follow us on WeChat, but how many are coming from WeChat to actually take the real class material? And we were finding, well, maybe that's not the best KPI to focus on. It's great that you can distribute articles and get a lot of views, and we're going to continue to do it, but it wasn't necessarily producing the results we originally were looking for, which was to get more people on the platform. Similarly, the live streams we do several times a week, they're great for this really strong community we've built, keeping us engaged and moving forward. But originally we had viewed it also as a marketing channel of bringing new people in. And we're actually finding that while it's good for engaging the community, we can make a 15-minute short video, publish that, and it's just so much easier to share and go to other channels that within 3 days, doing the shorter videos spiked our traffic by 400%. So it's just, you have to keep trying different things to see what works for what purpose. So we're going to keep doing the live streams, but would the live stream be the number one way to get more views? Probably not. The short videos are better. So this is actually a picture from the lawn outside from one of our classes here. Geez, that must have been like 2 months ago now. Yeah. And all I wanted to say to that picture was, even though we had to reevaluate the best way to reach more students, and we started to alter our teaching methods, the small achievements of hitting 10,000 followers on WeChat and hundreds of attendees in our live streams has, really motivated our team and our students and everybody to keep the ball rolling. All right, so that's enough of the story part. So now this is going to be more on, and again, anybody who's really taken business administration class is going to be very basic for you, but I wanted to take it from the perspective of, I'm an engineer, I have an idea, what the heck do I do? Because even if you get a lawyer, you want to be able to intelligently know some of the trade-offs between the early decisions you'll have to make. So today we're going to cover how to set up the company, how the visa status is going to affect your ability to found a company, and then a very short intro to fundraising, the basic types of methods of fundraising, and stock types. So the first thing you have to choose is what type of business entity you're going to do. And there's 3 primary types in the US. There's actually more, but LLC, S Corp, and C Corp. I've crossed S Corp out. We're not going to cover it today. It's very unattractive for people with H-1Bs. If you don't have a green card, you basically can't do an S Corp, and an S Corp is very similar to an LLC anyways, so most people in the U.S. don't do those either.
An expert is going to talk about it.
Okay.
Not a same,
yeah. Anyways, both are going to give you what's called personal liability protection, okay, which means, like right now, if you didn't have a company, right, and you started doing business and enter contracts with people, if you don't deliver on your end of the contract, you could be sued for your personal money. Once you set up an LLC or a corporation, your company could go out of business, but you don't have as much personal liability. And one other detail on this is you can set up in any state in the U.S., but most of the time, especially if you're going to do the VC route, you want to set your company up in Delaware because they decided as a state they were going to just pass the best laws for corporate structure and governance. So the reason they're better is if you ever do an IPO or even a sale of the company, the rules for like how you get shareholder approval and also the rules of how much information has to be public is more in the favor of the company in Delaware. So even though we're in California, you could still register your company in Delaware. So that's just a little tip that a lot of first-time entrepreneurs may not know. So here's just a couple pros and cons. The LLC, it's really the simplest entity type in my opinion. It's very easy to go from an LLC to a C Corp. It's basically a few $100s, and you have to refile with the government anyways when you take on investors because you're going to have to update ownership percentages. There's no tax at the entity level. We're going to go in through a few tax examples because I think this is the biggest difference between the LLC and the C Corp from a monetary perspective. And it is actually, I think, the best entity type for companies that's going to pay out their profits to their investors yearly. So like when we were a consulting company, if you're just going to be a 3-man developer team, you're going to charge companies to do work for them. You're going to make the money and you're going to pay it out to the owners. LLC is what you want. If you're setting up, if you're like a doctor setting up a practice, probably an LLC is what you want. But if you're going to pour the money back into the company, build value, and try to sell the company or do an IPO, C Corp is going to be better. Some of the cons also, it's harder to issue ISOs, which are employee stock options with LLCs. And it makes your personal taxes a little more complicated, so it's not preferred by investors. Again, it's a good one before you have investors. And then for a C corporation, this is what most big companies are, right? Like Apple Inc., anything with an Inc. is a C corporation. It's the best entity type for building value in your business that you're going to sell. You can issue different kinds of stock, both the stock options to your employees and also different kinds of stock to different investors in different rounds. The bad part of it is you're going to pay like a nearly 40% tax on all the profits that you make at the entity level, and then you're going to pay tax again when you pay it out to your owners. Okay, so we'll go through a tax example and show how that works, but U.S. has the most aggressive corporate tax in the world, and it's pretty painful. So here's the LLC tax example. An LLC makes $1 million in 2016. Bill, Mary, and Fred each own a third of the company, right? So that year, they have to report $333K in earnings on their tax return, regardless of if the company pays them the money or not. It could still be in the company account. Maybe you got paid $0. You're going to owe like $70,000 or something in tax, right? So this is why investors don't like it, because a VC fund, and particularly institutional investors, they want to give you the $5 million for 10% or whatever, and then they don't want to be paying tax every year on the profit the company makes until you sell the company and they get their percentage, right? So it's good because when you see the next example, if it was a C Corp, you make the $1 million, you each own a third, right? Before anybody touches anything, the government takes 40%, so the money goes down to $600K. Then if you were going to pay $200K to Bill, Mary, or Fred, right, the remaining $600, you would each pay your personal taxes on it again. So at that income level, you'd be paying close to 40% again between state and federal. So you actually, that $1 million goes down to $360K by the time it hits people's personal bank accounts. So it's good for the investors because if the money stays in the company bank account, they don't have to pay any money, right? Just the entity does. But if you were going to be like what I was talking about earlier, a consulting company where you're paying out the money every year, it's better to be the LLC than the C Corp, where you're going to pay this extra layer of tax. All right, so this one, I'm sure a lot of people have this question because it can be a little bit tricky on an H-1B visa to start a company, but many of the best tech companies in the U.S. were built by immigrants. Google, Tesla, PayPal, AT&T, eBay, Yahoo, I'm sure hundreds and hundreds more, but those are just some of the big ones that came to mind. Transferring the H-1B to a new startup is a little trickier, but actually in my conversations with students, there seems to be this perception that it's nearly impossible and it has to be a huge company to sponsor the H-1B, and that's not correct. It is a little bit easier than that. But regardless of my information today, for this stuff, you always consult your immigration lawyer on top of this. I just wanted to give you a basic idea. So in the early stage approach, maybe you have an idea, but you have no money yet, right? You can contribute your own money. You can own an equity percentage in a company. That's why foreigners can come here and invest in companies, and as long as they're not employed by the company, there's no problem, right? So the only thing you can't do in the early stage is actually be employed by the company and working full-time for compensation for it. You can have discussions about it after your day job. You can contribute money if they found the company before the H-1B is transferred, you can be listed on the founding document as owning 33%, 50%, 100% if it's just your own startup. But I was going to say it is easier to team up with a U.S. citizen or a green card holder for the H-1B process. We're going to go over it on the next page, but in recent years there is a workaround to this, so you can actually found your own company by yourself. So let's go to that slide. So the first requirement is that the company has to be able to afford the minimum salary for the H-1B. Every positional title has a prevailing wage that the U.S. government sets. That's why with pre-investment, your company's just not going to qualify because it needs to have enough money in the bank account to pay your salary. This is the one that's tricky if you set up on your own, is that you have to prove that you're technically not in control of your own employment. So that means you have to be able to be fired. So a way you can get around this is if you set up a company, let's say you get your first round of investors. When you take on an investor, you normally set up a board of directors if you haven't already. You can set up whatever contract you want with your board of directors. So you can actually, say you even own 100%. You bring on an investor, you give them 10%. You can also say as part of that deal, they're on the board of directors and they have the right and the only vote to hire or fire you. So even though you own 90% and they own 10, they could still fire you from the company. That doesn't necessarily mean they can alter your percentage. That would be a separate aspect of the deal. Sometimes that's part of the deal, but the point is that's one way to say that you're no longer in control of your own employment. The other way is if you team up with somebody and they own 51% and you own 49%, then you're also not in total control, right? You own a minority percentage. So those are kind of the two ways that you can prove that you're not in control of your own employment. And the total cost for this will be somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, largely depending. If you've gone through this before, you know there's a slow way to get the H-1B, there's a fast way. You pay extra money if you want it done within a month. Otherwise, it takes like up to 6 months, but they give you permission to start working very quickly after like 4 days. So basically, the closing advice there is stay as a passive investor. Passive investor just means owning a percentage but not working full-time for the company until your new company raises the funding to allow you to transfer the H-1B. And then this is just from our own personal experience. Don't spend crazy hours moonlighting at your new startup and get yourself fired from your current job, because I know there's also this perception that there's like a grace period when you get fired from one job to go to the next one. Technically, that's not true. There's no grace period. The reason people think that is, one, our government's like really slow, so there is a grace period in practice, even though legally there's not. And second, it's based off paychecks. So yeah, you technically have like a week or so before your paycheck looks too old and they say, well, why aren't you employed? But basically, don't moonlight crazy hours until you're ready to transfer your H-1B. It's just not going to be good for your new startup. Okay, so these are just a few of the fundraising basics. There's really 3 groups you're going to be interacting with in the beginning. The first one is kind of personal connections, credits, loans, and the 3 Fs, family, friends, and fools. So basically, anybody you can convince to, the credit cards is obvious. You can just spend a bunch of money on your credit cards. You go to the bank, get a loan, or family and friends. Usually, hopefully, you're not depending on fools, but that's the saying at least. But by the time you get to the seed round, you're mainly going to be dealing with either angels or VCs. A lot of people tend to use those interchangeably now, but angels are usually successful entrepreneurs or business people who are investing their own personal money, whereas a VC will go out. VCs are also often successful entrepreneurs or business people, not necessarily though. And they go raise a fund of $50 or $100 million, and then they use that to invest in companies. And the reason I just wanted to point out the difference is an angel is more likely to invest in something they're really passionate about, and they might be willing to invest at an earlier stage for returns that are going to happen much later. A VC may approach it more from, I have 10 years to get the returns on my fund, so is this something I think is going to be exiting within 5 years? We have one investor who's an angel and one who's a VC. Again, the most important thing when evaluating which investors you want to work with goes back to those core values. Find investors that really you could work with on a deep level, because they can be a great resource for you, and you're going to be spending a lot of time with them in board meetings. So you really want to pick somebody you're going to work well with. So in the very beginning, the most common forms of investment are going to be, most common forms of stock or notes you would issue are going to be preferred stock and convertible notes. Initially, convertible notes probably, because they're essentially a loan that can be converted into equity at your first round of fundraising. They're really good for young startups that don't want to lock in a low valuation right away, because maybe you have a great idea, you need a little money to build the prototype. There's no prototype yet, right? So somebody might only give you $100,000 for 30% of the company. You could say, look, give me $100,000 as a loan. I'm going to pay you interest on the loan, and then when the prototype's done and I go for the seed round funding, you have the option. Either I pay you back the loan, or it converts into equity at the valuation at that point, which once you have the prototype, maybe the valuation's much better, right? So you don't have to give up as much stock. So it's definitely an option to keep in mind. Sometimes if you're between rounds of financing, it's another way. Doing a round of financing is a lot of paperwork. So if you're trying to raise a little money in between, it's better to do it this way and roll them into the next round. All right, so quickly, I know these slides have a lot of text. The reason for that is I was going to offer to give people these slides if they wanted it as a reference afterwards, so I wanted to put more text on the screen. Preferred stock is what most VCs and angels are going to want once you get to the fundraising round. It's called preferred as opposed to common stock. Common stock is what the founders of the company are going to hold and your employees. And the reason it's called preferred is because people who hold preferred stock have what's called a liquidation preference, sometimes in multiples. And this means they're going to get some money back before anybody in the common stock gets money back when the company's sold. You'll also usually have additional rights, like the right to maintain your ownership percentage whenever new rounds of capital are raised. It's called the right of first refusal. It's also slightly different from another kind of stock called participating preferred, which allows investors to basically have a liquidation preference and be in the common stock. We're going to go through some examples now to see the difference between preferred stock when you sell your company at a low valuation, preferred stock at a higher valuation, and then participating preferred. Because it's important to understand the differences here so you can do the math in your head when you're raising money. So let's go through first scenario. An investor gives you $100K for 10% preferred stock at a 2x preference. You sell your company for $500K. It wasn't that successful. You built some interesting idea. Somebody said, I'll give you $500,000 for it. The investor is going to get 2 times their original money back, which is going to be $200K at this point, even though they only own 10%. Right? So they actually end up getting 40% because the liquidation preference means they get to go first. If they choose. It's a choice, basically. So they said, okay, 10% would only be $50K. I'm going to take the 200. Then the rest of the founders would split up the common stock would split up the 300K. So that didn't work that well that time, but it seems like the company didn't work that well in that example. Here's example number 2. Same investment, $100K for 10%, 2x preference. But this time the company sells for $5 million. Now the VC is going to say, I could take the 200K, but I'm better off skipping that and just taking my 10% so it basically become common stock, and then they take 500K, right? So if you think your company's going to do well, a liquidation preference is not that bad, right? Because if you break, in this case, once you sell above 2 million, they're just going to take their 10%. And then example 3, this is the participating preferred example, 100K investment for 10% participating preferred stock at a 2x preference. Company sells for $5 million. It's like the previous example, except now they get to do both. They get to take the 200K liquidation preference, and then they still get 10% common stock, so they get 10% of the remaining. Oh, I have an error here. Should have been 4.8 million, not 9.8. So they would get another 480K. So that's the one where you really have to want to work with the investor if they're demanding participating preferred stock. It's not common to give participating preferred in the seed round, at least, maybe in later rounds, but usually it'll be regular preferred stock. All right, so just the closing advice to this section: always get a lawyer involved once you start fundraising, but keep in mind the general ideas we've discussed here, so you at least know the right questions to ask. And just recognize once you take the investment on, the clock's ticking for results, So don't just, I see too many people, they finish one round of fundraising and they're just thinking about the next round of fundraising. And it does work for these like unicorn companies maybe. I don't know. I think that's a bubble that might be popping soon, but it should really be, I took on investment. Let's hit the milestones that we set with the investors. Let's start to prove out a business model so that when we go to the A round, it's because we want to expand a working business model, not because we just need somebody else's money to spend again and we're just going to, not focus. So that's all I got. I wanted to open the floor for any questions, if there are any, about starting a company or any of the slides.
There's a question online.
Yeah.
And she asked, how many meetings do you need with your investors? How many meetings each month?
Yeah, I would say plan for the fundraising. You mean once they've invested, how many meetings? Yeah. Typically, you do one meeting every 3 months, a board meeting. Some investors you might want to meet with more often. One of our investors offered to meet with us once a month, and since we were mostly engineers and less business-oriented, and he's very good at refining business models, we basically came to an understanding that, look, we're not going to do the full board meeting because you have certain responsibilities to the investor of presenting financial information at board meetings, and certain things will have to be approved by the board that have to be done there. But I would say, again, that really depends on the investor. It'll be at least once every 3 months. It could be more often if there's somebody you really want to work with.
All right, I have a question.
Yeah.
Steve, most people believe for start a company, for the long run, they always shooting for C corporation, right?
Yeah.
And for the smaller company, they can do a LLP. Is that right? Is that what's the best
LLC normally? LLP is usually just for law firms. Now, there may be a few other professions that do that.
Yeah.
Accountants,
accountants.
I
work for PwC.
PwC would be an LLP, yeah.
Okay.
Like the traditional professions typically can do the LLP stuff, yeah.
Okay, LLC. Okay, good.
But,
thank you.
Okay, that was the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One question: how do you got the come up with the core values you released there?
Again, I think initially it was kind of like a meeting of the minds of two people who realized they connected at a very deep level, and then at a certain point we were like, okay, we got to put this into words. Let's describe a little bit of what these core values are so that we can rally around them. But yeah,
I want to add, the interesting that when our team was discussing about core value, we select words that we talk every day. So they are very frequent words we always say during our meetings, during our normal time.
Yeah, I think those core values are very good values, especially for startups. I just really want to know how you formalize those values. Actually, they're pretty well.
Yeah, well, let's go back to one of our core values, honesty. We only really formalized them into the form they are now when I was preparing for this presentation, because it finally forced me to go back, and that's why doing stuff like this as a startup is really good, because it forces you to go back, evaluate. So what is this kind of, we know there's this base core values that we've been sharing, but actually putting them into words so they can be communicated to other people. I found actually the whole experience of putting together this very short presentation in and of itself was a good way of reflecting back on the last 3 months.
Yeah, actually there's something I want to ask, some interesting potential conflict between the values. One is openness, the second is focus. Right?
Third,
so
yeah.
How do you control when you are open to new ideas, to test new directions, and when you decided we need to keep focusing on this one until we have real proof that it doesn't work or work?
Yeah. Well, I think again the openness is kind of it kind of back to that like second slide of be stubborn on the vision but open to the details. So if some particular initiative that you've put together isn't getting you the numbers or isn't getting you to the progress towards the main vision, right? You have to, I've seen too many people, they get fixated on one approach or one piece of technology or one marketing channel, right? And there's all this feedback coming at them that that's not working, and you maybe need to take a step back and do a brainstorming session again about the best way to achieve these goals, and they just keep going. So the openness is more about, it's almost an awareness of paying attention and not just being obsessed with your own predefined ideas, right? But the focus part is you still have this vision that you've set out to achieve. So you can, being too open, you can get into that kind of analysis paralysis, right, where you're just always overthinking and you never get to just do it. So I don't think, all those values really work together. It's like taking one out by its own might be a little bit out of balance on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think the world is very, very complex. When you face the real problem, you will find, this core value seems the usually sometimes, and how can the core value help me to get out of the trouble? But the truth that you should face the the pain, the top of everything. You have some hope, you lose your hope. Sometimes you feel you have everything, sometimes you feel you have nothing. It's true, but sometimes what I can say is that just keep going. This is only the fundamental thing I think. But the one thing that do not think there's one silver bullet can kill everything.
Right.
No one piece thing can kill everything. You should do it. Make your hand dirty. Just do it.
Yeah.
I have a question. For startup, do you think it's good to use the new technologies or use the neutral ones? Since the new technologies probably become dominant ones in the future.
So sorry, the question is, should you use new technologies or as opposed to what?
I'll use a stable one.
Oh.
It's a very
Some
Yeah.
legacy.
Yeah, that really depends on what your startup idea is. Like, if it's really a technology play, like your Agora, right, and you're making a new state-of-the-art video service, then probably using the latest cutting-edge technologies to get the lower latency, more efficient video distribution is really important. For a company like BitTiger, where it's much more, the success or failure of the company isn't so much how nice our website is, although that's important, or whether it uses the latest framework. It's more of an execution play on building a community around it, right? So for us, it's like, it's more focused on how do you build a good community, how do you get a community of teachers trained to produce high quality content. It's less about technology, cutting edge technology for our startup. So we stay fairly cutting edge, but I would almost value stability more than cutting edge for what we're doing. Yeah. So yeah, it depends.
So not to upset or what, but I just wanted to ask what if it fails? Like you have a dream, you want to start something, but it seems like you have everything, but what if one day it fails and you don't have a whatever legal status to stay here, but it fails? So what would you do? How would you mentally prepare for that?
Yeah, you're going to be feeling that a lot in a startup because there's a very good chance it fails. And I'm not going to repeat the quote, but there's that very famous quote from Jack Ma, right, where he talks about, I applied to school 30 times and failed. I tried to work in the professional world and I failed. And I think coming to terms with failure is a big part of being an entrepreneur. I had one failed startup that I founded before this and one failed startup I worked at before this. So, it's going to happen. But I do understand from a visa perspective, it's much more serious, right? So what I would say is, what I said in the presentation is don't transfer the visa till you have at least initial funding, right? Because you have to prove you can pay the salary before they'll even let you transfer the H-1B. And then you will know when you're running out of money a few months in advance, right? So if it really looks like it's going south and the visa is a top priority, then I would have an understanding with my co-founders at the beginning that, look, when we're down to 2 or 3 months cash, I'm going to start looking for another job if we haven't made serious progress towards getting money, right? So
I can help because I personally got from F1 student from China. Currently I have a U.S. citizenship. Since last century. When I was born. So I have enough experience.
The other question online and the very traditional question. How did you know me? How do we meet each other?
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so it's an interesting story. I was on a meditation retreat in Maine last summer, and I get there and I'm greeted, signing in at the front, and they said, "All right, this is going to be your room. Your roommate. He's this Chinese guy. He doesn't speak English." Right. So I go, "All right, now this retreat." This retreat started with 3 days of silence. So I got to my room. There was this Chinese guy there. I guess he doesn't speak English, right? So we go through the first 3 days, and then
what school? I'm curious.
Huh?
What school?
Of
Which
meditation.
retreat? Yeah.
It was a meditation retreat. Yeah.
Oh my God. I see.
Anyways, the time goes by. We finally can talk. I find out he does actually have a very good English vocabulary. He was just speaking very fast at the time and confusing the other Americans. So we formed a very deep connection very quickly. We were both doing similar kinds of artificial intelligence programming. I think I went from thinking he didn't speak English to Qiyuan telling me his entire PhD thesis that night, and somehow I was able to understand it. So I think we just became very good friends after that point, and we kind of knew we wanted to start a company, but we didn't even have a vision at that point. We just knew we wanted to do something together. Yeah.
So speaking of that,
Yeah.
you said you got investment, right? So the investment is for your vision of doing corporate consulting, or for this?
No. We never took investment when we were doing consulting. At that point, we already knew we wanted to do project-based online education. So really more hands-on. Yeah.
There's another question. How do you define the responsibility of each member in the team? We have the
Yeah.
members. How to define the responsible?
Yeah, I think initially we left some space for that for people to find their own strengths in the team. Like everybody in our team actually started working with us. So far we have 4 people full time. Everybody started working for us before we had any money. So they just kind of came and found a role that they evolved into. So even like a guy like Ming Che that does all of our marketing and student outreach right now. He has a master's in computer science. Like he would have never been able to make the transition to marketing, which is actually what he's really good at. I mean, I'm sure he's a good programmer too, but he's really quite good at the marketing stuff. So we kind of initially left some space so people could find what they were good at, but it was important once we kind of got the investment and started working full time that we were able to set goals and KPIs, kind of, again, smaller goals like by the week or month, so that people were motivated to achieve stuff, and so that we made sure everybody was contributing. Yeah. There was a lady in the back that had a question.
So my question is, at which point, what is the best time to look for investors? Do you have a strategy for doing that?
Yeah, I have a rule of thumb, which is have a prototype. Because you can either be talking to a PPT like this, and it was funny, we did pitch some VCs with PowerPoints, and I'm not really, as you saw, my slides are very crude. I'm not really a PowerPoint guy, and every time I tried to pitch reading off a PowerPoint, it was a disaster. When I actually built the prototype of our website, and I basically gave the same presentation, but talking to the features of the prototype I built, the very first guy we pitched to that ended up becoming our lead investor. So I just think actions speak louder than words, and having some basic, product, it's really good if one person on your team has some engineering skills so they can do at least the basic, even if it's more visual than functionality, if people could at least see and immerse themselves in what you're trying to do, then it's easier for them to connect with your idea.
But the website is not a prototype of your vision, right? I mean,
yeah, it was a prototype of first of all, the website now is different than the prototype we had when we pitched investors. It was basically a marketing page of this is how people would interact with our system, and you could log in and do some basic stuff, but it wasn't a fully functional website. It was just kind of describing the path that people would take going through our program. It just, to me, it was a more effective way of telling the story. Some people are really good with the PPT, and if you're trying to raise like $20 million or something huge and you're in a big room with like 20 VCs watching, that's a better format, actually, doing the PowerPoint format. But if it's more like informal, like one-on-one, if you're an engineer, I think it's better to build a demo and work off that. Hey.
Can you share the slides with us, maybe?
Absolutely, yeah. What channel is the best way to distribute the slides?
I can do it, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that's definitely the intention.
Maybe another thing that what's the difference in your opinion of the A round, B round, C round, or D round, EFI round? So much round.
Yeah, I've never done or been in a company that went past A round, so I could talk to seed and A. Yeah, I've only worked for small companies. I've never worked for a big company, so. the seed round, or even before seed round, if you're doing the convertible notes, right? That's usually like your pre-revenue round, in my opinion. So this is like the money you're going to use to finance the beginning of the company, to set up the company, get an office, go from prototype to at least your beta version. And again, this is my own opinion now. There's a lot of people, like I was saying, just keep targeting the next round of financing. But in my own opinion, I think by the time you're done with the seed round, you should have at least done some testing of a business model, right? And be ready. To me, the A round is about, I've built the prototype, I've done my market research, I've tested the product, and I've tested the business model. Now I want to scale it to millions of users, or if it's not a millions of user model, maybe it's B2B, I want to scale it to hundreds of other companies. And it's more like you'd be raising in the millions by the A round, and you're going to be using it to scale the application. But that's not across the board. Some people are still very much in development by the A round. Yeah.
Can you share the lessons learned from the previous experience that, like, somebody's company or your own that didn't pass the A round?
Sure, absolutely. So my first company was a kind of a social networking site that was like about 10 years ago now. My big problem then was I was a developer, but I was like a one-man team. I wasn't as skilled at full stack development, so I ended up using like a third-party platform for it. And when that company shut down, basically, I wasn't in control of all my data. So I started to realize, sometimes it's better to have a simpler site or a simpler product that you build yourself than to try to get all this fancy stuff out of the box. But if it's so core to your business and then that company disappears, you're really hosed. Now that was really like, I didn't spend that much money on that. That was kind of like, I was 18 years old. I was just experimenting at that point. The next startup, which I was the first engineer they hired, but I wasn't a co-founder, their big problem, they really smart people, lots of MIT PhDs. We were doing industrial automation, AI type applications. And you had really smart people, but it was almost like too many smart people that didn't share the core value and the core vision and couldn't be honest with themselves, because what they were really doing was high value consulting projects. We'd get a project for a few $1 million, or we get a project that paid, like we did the upfront work for free, but then they paid us $50,000 a month or something to run it almost like as a software as a service model, but custom deployments. But they kept telling their employees and telling their shareholders that, this is going to be $1 billion company, we're on the verge of something great. But it's like, no, you're really just doing custom. It was really a lifestyle company, and it was a good lifestyle for the 10, 15 guys that were working there. But if you're trying to convince your employees to come here and that the stock options are like a considerable value, then just doing custom deployments isn't really what you're doing. So just be honest about what you're doing, and there was a disconnect there in terms of everybody being aligned. And I don't know. I could spend hours, I think, talking about the things that were wrong. But yeah, that's the one that always stands out to me as the number one.
The
thing.
story of the guru.
Oh yeah, we also had a CEO that thought he was like a Taoist priest. It's a whole other issue. Yeah.
Okay, very important. How can people doing stuff overcome psychology blocker? I would say because according to the successful rate for startup company worldwide, probably around 1.2% Bay Area probably 2 or 3%. It's very low, very low successful rate.
Right.
Like how can people overcome this?
The psychological block of saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you start to think of everything in terms of numbers and statistics and logic, you're going to talk yourself out of doing a startup, because there's not a lot of logic about it. It's more like, for me, everything starts with curiosity. Like when I fill out my U.S. tax return every year, I'm like, there has to be a better way of doing this. Even TurboTax, which came and made it an order of magnitude better, still I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. Once you start to have other categories of tax. Anyways, the point is, I look at products the same way. Like, if something's broken, what can I do to fix it, right? And for us, it was the education system, but but it could really be anything. And if you really lock on to something that you really believe is broken and you really can provide value to people, I think if you can assemble the right team of founders, you will be successful. And there's a lot of ideas for whatever reason that don't work out. But yeah, my only advice to overcome the psychology piece is, like, before I did this startup, when I was working at the last company, I saved money for 3 years to be able to go a few months without having to work to build the prototype to get to the investment round. So plan ahead for wanting to do that. If you're here on an H-1B and you want increased flexibility, then stay working at Google or wherever the tech company you're working at around here, work through the green card process, save money, and then do it then. I mean, this perception that you have to be, in your early 20s to start a company, I mean, that's been totally disproven, right? I mean, most entrepreneurs are in their 50s, late 40s, early 50s. And I think the most important thing is create a situation for yourself financially, legally, whatever your considerations are, where if you fail, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, sure, you might have some missed financial opportunity. You could have been working at another job, but don't it's not like trying to hit the lottery or something. If you're approaching it like that, then do the number analysis and realize it's probably not good odds. Yeah.
Great point. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm not sure because I'm kind of late, but I heard that you are mastering meditation, and I just wonder if you could share some experience in that.
Yeah, master is not the right word. All right, it's definitely an ongoing practice. Yeah, I think one of the potential problems with a startup or even working in a tech company in Silicon Valley is like your life getting totally out of balance, right? And you're so into work all the time, and you're thinking at a very high level. I mean, programming is some crazy combination of like a mathematical type thinking and creativity, like working at the same time, right? So it's very exhausting. And meditation is kind of just there to teach you to, even momentarily, let that go and kind of relax. And I mean, some of our core values come from the meditation practice. I mean, the openness part about willing to be there with whatever feedback you're getting back, whether it's positive or negative, and instead of just watching Netflix or going on YouTube or something, actually being able to sit with your own mind and kind of train it on how to focus. I found it to be very valuable. Now, for some people, sitting meditation isn't going to be the right thing. For some people, it's riding your bike, taking a hike, reading a book, right? But something where you can kind of let go of the mental chatter for a little while. I mean, I think that's what's really important.
So I've been meditating for a while, like 1 to 2 years, and it feels like it's not a lot of change. So it's like every time you meditate, like you can feel some change, but there's not a lot of like improvements on it. So I'm just wondering, like for people like you.
I think most of the time when you feel something, it's like from a transition phase. Like I remember when I started meditating, I mean, initially I just had this like image in my mind, like of a Buddhist monk in a mountain somewhere who meditates for like 20 years and then has a realization. And when I started meditating, I'd say after about 3 or 4 weeks, I felt a pretty sudden change in the way my mind was working and how it was able to focus. But once that transition happens, then it's like, you only really feel something strong when you're transitioning from one state to another. Like if you were really happy and then something bad happens, you're going to feel really sad because you feel that transition, coming down from the happiness. But sorry, I went off track for a second. But I wouldn't get discouraged with that. Maybe you're a really good meditator and that's why you don't feel it. But for me, it came down to, if we just want to approach it from a practical aspect, if you're following your breath, right? Just following maybe the out breath in meditation, thoughts start to come up, right? Normally we might daydream, maybe we have a date on Friday night, maybe I have a presentation tomorrow, you start thinking about all this stuff, right? I would just say when you notice that, you come back to your breath. So you're kind of training your mind to keep coming back to one thing. In this case, it's the breath. And then when you drift off, you would come back to it again. So when I'm programming now, it's like, I don't know if this was on purpose, but now, like when I'm working on something, if I start to get distracted, quicker and quicker, I'll come back to whatever the task was at hand instead of like going on Facebook or going on YouTube. So that's one way I describe it, but really I think it's more about maintaining a mental balance. That's how I feel about it.
I think we use all our time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you have one more question or no?
No, I think.
All right, and I can answer one-on-one. I can answer.
Yeah, we can answer later. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to close the live stream. So thanks everybody for
all right,
for
thank
coming.
you.
Yeah.